right, I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Commission of October 1st, 2014. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. Out of courtesy for those attending the meeting, the commissioners and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We appreciate your cooperation. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, the gate will be open, and you will not need a coupon to exit. The Planning Commission action today is final on items number 4.2C, pre-existing special permit number 40A. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council by filing a notice of appeal with the City Clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held September 17th, 2014. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the question?
Yes.
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 Abstain.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Jean to read all of the consent agenda items into the record. Once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Jean, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Thank you. Item numbers 1.1A and B are related. Annexation number 14005, annexing approximately 39 acres more or less, including adjacent West O Street right-of-way, generally located at Southwest 56th Street and West O Street, and change of zone number 14026 from AG Agricultural District to I-1 Industrial District and H3 Highway Commercial District. Again, the property is located at Southwest 56th Street and West O Street. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on the consent agenda?
I see none.
And is there anyone here wishing to speak on the consent agenda?
Seeing no one, we will entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Call the vote.
Sunderman,
Yes.
Harris, Beecham,
Yes.
Cornelius,
Yes.
Pogue,
Yes.
Left.
Yes.
Motion for approval carries 6-0. These are recommendations to the City Council.
There are no requests for deferral on today's agenda, so we will now proceed to the public hearings. The staff will make a brief presentation. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer goes off after 4 minutes, then you have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of public hearing unless the Commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Jean, please call the first public hearing item.
Thank you. Item 4.1 on page 17, Comprehensive Plan Conformance number 14019. To review as to conformance with the comprehensive plan, a proposed amendment to the Lincoln Center redevelopment plan to add the A&P 2 redevelopment project to redevelop the Ambassador and President apartment buildings located across from the State Capitol building. This project would create new affordable residential opportunities, approximately 71 units, while maintaining and preserving the Art Deco style decorative brickwork and finely carved stonework facades. The redevelopment project area includes lots 5 and 6, block 122 Original Lincoln, together with the east half of the vacated north-south alley adjacent thereto, and adjacent South 14th Street and Lincoln Mall rights-of-way. It's generally located at the northwest corner of 14th Street and Lincoln Mall. The redevelopment plan area itself is generally bounded by Salt Creek, Interstate 180 and R Street on the north, 17th Street on the east, G Street on the south, and Salt Creek 2nd Street and Sun Valley Boulevard on the west. The staff recommendation is a finding of conformance with the comprehensive plan. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none.
Thank you.
Ernie Castillo, Urban Development Department applicant. This plan, as many of you know, is the first step in the redevelopment process. The ambassador and president proposal consists of an extensive renovation to the existing 2 buildings. The current 55 efficiency and 29 one-bedroom apartments will be renovated into 30 efficiency and 41 one-bedroom affordable units. TIF eligible expenses are Lincoln Mall Street, 14th Capitol, and then the 2 buildings, the ambassador and the president. TIF eligible expenses that we're looking at currently is an HVAC, energy efficiency HVAC system, energy efficiency windows that still preserve the historic element of the buildings, and some improvements to the courtyard. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions, and we also have a representative of the developers here.
Could you just show us where the courtyard is that could be improved?
Hard to see, but here are the
Right between the 2 buildings.
Okay.
Courtyard's right in between.
Do you
Thank
have
you.
any pictures of the buildings?
I don't. I have some elevations, the existing. I don't have any pictures, Andrew may, of the completed project. I do
Okay.
have the, where we read it, ambassador, different elevations, west, south. These are probably the 2 that most people recognize, the south elevations, buildings.
And so the sketch that you have in the middle, that courtyard is the one Janella was just asking about?
Correct.
Ernie, why does the redevelopment plan go to the south side of Lincoln Mall?
Generally, on the downtown projects, we include all the right-of-way abutting or adjacent to our project area. So we took it to the
building on the other side?
correct, and
Okay.
then to the east to the Capitol.
Right.
I noticed that a member of the the Capital Environment Commission asked if this was going to come back to them, and I couldn't see in the minutes what the answer had ever been. Do you know on that one?
As far as I know, right now, we are not scheduled to go back.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, we'll hear testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon. Andrew Willis with Klein Williams, 233 South 13th Street, Suite 1900. We represent the developer of the Ambassador and President project. As Ernie said, this is essentially an extensive rehabilitation and remodeling of the Ambassador and President buildings. It's kind of, I see it as sort of three pieces to this. There's the internal design, renovation, and remodel of the units, going from a smaller 84 units to a larger, more updated 71 units, including that energy efficient HVAC that was mentioned, and some other major improvements. Also, the restoration of the historical facades. A big piece of this is maintaining that the preservation and historical integrity for this project. And then third, the rehabilitation and reconstruction of the courtyard to make it more in line with the historical the buildings and essentially adding in some updates and some suggestions from Capital Environs Committee. That's kind of the three pieces. From the outside, the pictures that Ernie showed, there really isn't any other pictures to show from the final project because the goal is not to change much on the exterior at all. There'll be some tuck pointing, some replacement of damaged windows with period appropriate windows. And then the replication of the historical awning that was hung on the President building that says President, just kind of the replication of the historic awning. And then the courtyard changes, which will include essentially some green space, a fence and gated area, and these were recommendations from Capital Environs, so we're kind of incorporating those into the project. We're very excited about this, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Sure. The vote before us right today is whether this project conforms to the comprehensive plan. Could you just address just real quickly how it does fit in with the comprehensive plan?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, we have the downtown Lincoln. It's going to be a residential area. It's actually, I mean, it's a residential area right now, but reuse of this area, renovation, and it's affordable housing project. If I didn't mention that, so we are bringing in more affordable housing units into the downtown area. And so, along those lines, that hits on the points of preserving housing opportunities, safe and affordable housing, and then also obviously the historical preservation in this area right by the Capitol.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, given that you're just a couple blocks away from an elementary school, why you chose to only do one-bedroom and efficiencies? I know you're doing some rechanging of floor plans. I was curious why you didn't think about throwing some two-bedrooms in there?
I don't have the answer to that, but I can say that it's a change from very small efficiencies right now that are very small to a more typical one-bedroom. I guess I don't know the answer of why that wasn't increased beyond that, other than I guess I'm not sure the answer, sorry.
Okay.
I don't want to speculate too much.
What's the current clientele in that building?
Is
low-income housing?
Yeah, it's low-income housing right now, and so and there's a
Continue that way.
Yep, and it would continue to be that way. So there'll be some tenant relocation involved, but only during their construction, and then those tenants would primarily remain in the building.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other testimony in support of this application?
Hi, Paula Ryan with Excel Development Group, 8551 Lexington Avenue, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68505. We are the developer for the project, and we have been working with Interfaith Housing Coalition for the last 3 years. They have owned the buildings for the last 20 years. And I would like to answer your question on the two bedrooms. They feel very strongly about the clientele that they support. A lot of the tenants are extremely low income. There is a supportive service coordinator on site. There's a food pantry on site. They wanted to continue to serve this very, very vulnerable population, but the buildings need very extensive renovation, and we want to be very sensitive to the historic nature of the buildings while ensuring that they are going to be viable for the next 50 years. And so that's really why we have come to you and are so pleased to finally be at this point with this project. It has been a long time coming. Do you have any questions for me?
Don't see any specific. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Is there any testimony in opposition? All right, do we have questions for staff? Not seeing any, so we don't need any rebuttal, so we'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion?
I think this is a good project, and I'm very happy. Thank you so much that you're keeping the historic integrity of the building. I think this is a real gem of an area. And I intend to support the motion.
Call the vote, please.
Sunderman,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Beecham,
Yes.
Cornelius,
Yes.
Bose,
Yes.
West.
Yes.
Motion approving a finding of conformance with the comprehensive plan carries 6-0, and this is a recommendation to the City Council. Calling for public hearing today, items 4.2A, B, and C. I will call them together for purposes of hearing. County Text Amendment 14012, amending Article 13.001, subparagraph 14 of the Lancaster County Zoning Resolution, and Text Amendment number 14013, amending Section 276316 of the Lincoln Municipal Code, both relating to special permits for excavation and stone milling, to allow stone milling as an accessory use to an excavation operation, and to eliminate stone milling as a separate permitted use, and clarify that pre-existing excavation operations may not meet all conditions. And item 4.3C is the pre-existing special permit number 40A, amending the special permit for excavation and stone milling to show existing and future buildings and to allow an additional access to South 54th Street. The property is generally located at South 54th Street and Whitstruck Road. The Planning Commission action on the two text amendments are recommendations to the County Board and the City Council, and the action on this special permit amendment is final unless appealed to the City Council. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed by the Commission?
I see none.
Good afternoon, Sarah Hartzell, Planning Department. I'm going to go over the two text amendments first. They're relatively simple amendments, but there is quite a bit of history on excavation special permits in the county. Prior to the 79 update in both the city and the county, excavation was an allowed use, meaning you didn't have to have any kind of special permit or conditional use permit in the ag district. It was also shown in several of the other city districts. None of the other county districts had excavation uses. But the use basically read that you could excavate, process, store materials or minerals that were mined from any portion of the district, so anywhere within the county. In 79 then, mining in the county shows up in the ag district again. And in the city district, it shows up in several of the other districts that are listed in the history portion of your report there, under various names: mining, quarrying, excavation of soil, rock crushers, stone mills. There were lots of different terms that were used for this. In 2009, there was a citizens group brought together to review some of these uses. There was some concern at the time. There was quite a bit of construction going on, particularly road projects. There was some citizen concern about soil mines that were opening up, and they didn't feel that there were sufficient controls on these soil mines, sufficient ways of checking and making sure that they were actually closed at the end of the period that they were used. So a task force was brought together, and they came up with language in both the city and the county that's very similar. In the city, they also kind of collapsed some of those various terms for excavation into a single special permit, which is special permit number 160, and is now called excavation and stone milling. So what we're looking at on these two pieces of language is two different clarifications. One has to do with the stone milling that's part of that title. Stone milling isn't actually defined in our code anywhere. It's not even described in the special permit as far as what that might entail. We did research stone milling in its common term, and basically it means cutting, grinding, processing materials that are mined from the earth in some way. So it could be rolling stones to turn them into river-type gravel. It could be slicing stones or monogramming on stones for decorative purposes, that sort of thing. So one of the changes that we're suggesting is to actually put in a descriptor on what stone milling is as the crushing, cutting, grinding, or otherwise processing of minerals. The other piece is the title of the special permit, excavation and stone milling. Stone milling could also mean rock crushing. They're kind of an interchangeable term because crushing is one of the things that you can do with the minerals. If we have a special permit that sets stone milling as a separate use, then it's possible that in some of these districts, like our agricultural districts, that we could have a stone mill or a rock crusher sitting on a piece of property by itself with no real connection to the use of that piece of property other than it's an open space. By making it clear, clarifying that stone milling is really supposed to be associated with an excavation special permit, we have that nexus of uses, that connection between materials being brought up out of the earth, materials being processed on site, which was what the original special permit said, or sorry, the original language that for an allowed use said was the mining and processing. And we make sure that it goes through this same kind of evaluation that the excavation permit goes through. So the stone milling associated with an excavation special permit. And then the other change is really kind of a clarification. We have, and you guys have had pre-existing special permits come before you before. A pre-existing special permit is granted to a property that was in a particular use prior to a change in the code. So in this case, it's being mined prior to a mine being required to have a special permit. So it was an allowed use. The code changes, it becomes a specially permitted use. So this is pre-existing legal, it's assumed to have a special permit. Now, when the special permit comes in, sometimes there are conditions to that special permit that are designed and written during the process of coming up with that particular piece of language. Those conditions don't always apply to existing special permits. And you've seen this quite a bit on alcohol sales. If you think about some of our separation requirements between alcohol and residential districts, schools, parks, things like that. Sometimes we have a facility that existed prior to those requirements. It's in place, it's been serving alcohol this entire time. The rules change, we don't make that go away. We give it a pre-existing special permit. We try to maintain that separation that exists, but we don't require that they meet the new conditions. So in this piece of language here, we're recommending a single sentence be added just to clarify that the lengthy conditions, there are about 2.5 pages of conditions in our special permit language for mining permits or for excavation permits, that not all of those are going to apply to a pre-existing special permit. It's actually something that we have been doing in practice for quite some time. Putting it in here just kind of strengthens that relationship. Any questions on these before I go on?
Yeah, the language of that sentence that you just described, not all of the conditions will apply to the pre-existing long-term excavation sites. The conditions are the ones that are set out in the statute or in the special permit?
Statute.
And when we say not all of the conditions, does that mean that there's some that will apply?
Yeah, whenever it's reasonable to be able to apply those conditions, we're definitely wanting to do that. And as many of the conditions as we could meet is desirable. For instance, the screening condition. But there are some conditions for a long term. When you're talking about a quarry that's been there, we have evidence up to 1971, but it may have been there as early as 1930s. The condition that it be closed within 3 years doesn't really apply.
Sure. So at whose discretion is it decided what conditions apply and what don't?
I think you have to evaluate each one when it comes forward. So,
okay, but if we have language in the statute that says not all of them will apply, don't we have to have some language that says who gets to decide which ones apply?
Well, I guess ultimately it's you. You are the ones that approve the special permit.
Sarah,
Okay.
have you been through each of the conditions and looked at each one and evaluated whether it
That's correct.
applies or not?
That's correct.
And so that's part
And
of
that's
your
my-
recommendation.
My analysis and my recommendation, right? For this particular special,
Right.
pre-existing special permit, correct?
Okay. I think I understand. Can you, Maya?
Does pre-existing mean before 2009?
Some of the conditions did change in 2009, so if it was a legal use before 2009 and new conditions came in, then yes, that would be pre-existing for those. In this particular case, it's also pre-existing to the requirement for a special permit at all. So when this existed, there was no requirement for a special permit. It was an allowed use in the district.
So do we need language then that, I guess I'm kind of following up on Janelle's thought, because I was a little troubled by the sense that this feels very broad, saying this is a special permit and we're going to put something in the text that says, oh, but it doesn't always count. I would be a lot more comfortable. I understand that each situation will be different. I guess, do we need something in the text that says to be determined, by Planning Commission? I mean, it feels very strange to me to be making a text amendment kind of opening the door so broadly,
But we're not really opening the door because these are still pre-existing uses. So the practice is if you have a legal use and it becomes a specially permitted use that you were existing before, you are pre-existing, you have a special permit. So even though the new conditions were written, I still have a special permit, and this particular one, short quarries, is assumed to have a special permit since they started operating. So that special permit is in place. Now, when they come forward and they want to make changes, then that's our opportunity to try to get as many of these conditions applied to that particular special permit.
But I'm sorry, go
Sarah,
ahead.
how do you document what conditions apply and what conditions are going to be waived or don't apply?
Well, I'm not sure that I document the ones that are not going to apply. The ones that are going to apply would be in the resolution of the special permit, on the site plan, in the notes of the site plan. Those would be the conditions of that particular special permit.
But those conditions that would normally be applied but aren't because they're grandfathered in,
It's not part of the special permit, but a person could always go back to the staff report, and that's part of the staff report analysis. The special permit, though, doesn't say condition 1 through 7 and 8 and 9 do not apply.
Okay, my question is, when a situation like this arises and you're deemed to have a pre-existing special permit, what does this language add to the situation? Because can't we already, when somebody comes in and asks for an amendment to an existing special permit, can't we already imply conditions to the change that they want to their special permit?
Yes.
So what is this language doing that we can't already do?
I think it's just formalizing in this particular special permit that statement.
Formalize that in all of the other special permit situations?
No, we don't.
So we could, through the special permit process, choose to waive the ones that...
On a pre-existing special permit.
Right.
Yes, we already have the ability to say,
we obviously can't expect you to do
they've been in
X, Y,
place
Z.
for however many years. This particular condition doesn't appear to be applicable to this. It's not even maybe possible that they can meet that particular
And that can be at the case-by-case basis of that particular special permit?
Right.
I guess I feel like this is becoming, I agree with what Janelle just said, that if this isn't everywhere and we have this situation anyway, maybe this language isn't necessary. But to clarify, what I'm hearing you say, Sarah, is there hypothetically exists a stone milling operation or a soil mine or whatever. It existed before there was any kind of requirement for a special permit.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether or not it meets the lengthy conditions required for a special permit, once the requirement for a special permit is put in place, it is assumed to have a special permit.
That's correct.
And all we're saying in this language is that assumption is made regardless of whether or not all the requirements are met.
Correct.
Okay.
But, okay, and here's what troubles me, is why are we putting this language only in this particular zoning ordinance when we don't do that in other zoning ordinances when we have the same situation with pre-existing special permits? And doesn't that imply that those other pre-existing special permits are going to be treated somehow differently?
Marvin Kraut, I don't think the pre-existing special permit question is, the real question here is what flexibility does the Planning Commission have when it comes to conditions? And we've got at least 76 different kinds of special permits in that chapter, and I will tell you that they vary in terms of what discretion the Planning Commission has. There are some, alcohol sales is one of those, where you have no discretion to reduce a condition or change a condition or eliminate compliance with a condition. The 100-foot rule is the 100-foot rule. No one, not even the City Council, has the ability to change that condition. There are others that specifically state that these are the conditions of the special permit, and only the City Council can waive or modify those conditions. An example of that would be reducing the front yard setback in a residential district for a parking lot. And you've had a couple of those. You had one recently in the College View area. And then there are others where it says that the Planning Commission can waive or modify the conditions. And we're clarifying that this is one of those. The conditions were drafted really to deal with the soil mining issue, hadn't contemplated the rock, the stone excavation and stone milling that would be associated with it. So we're really going back to say, really is a variety of kinds of excavation activities that can occur. And so the standards that were drafted mainly for soil mining don't all necessarily apply to this other kind of excavation operation. And so we're just saying you have the flexibility on a case-by-case basis to make modifications to those standards.
Oh, okay, so then my question is does the language, not all of the conditions will apply to pre-existing long-term excavation, does that apply just to the stone milling?
It really does.
That's being
it
added?
applies to a pre-existing special permit. I suppose it could be a mining pre-existing soil excavation too, although I don't know of any that are out there that are now 30 or 40 years old, so probably.
We do have one sand pit in the county, but that's the only other pre-existing that we know of.
But is the intent of that sentence to apply to the stone milling amendment or to the entire excavation section of that ordinance?
The entire stone excavation and stone milling section.
Okay.
To this entire application and what they're doing on the site.
But the fact that we're not saying, I guess I'm a little uncomfortable that we're not saying, at the discretion of Planning Commission or something. I mean, are we opening ourselves up by saying, here's a special permit, and by the way, they're not all going to apply to pre-existing excavations? I mean, that just seems very broad to me. I guess I wonder if you're saying that what we're trying to do is clarify that Planning Commission has the ability to waive or modify, is there wording that can say that rather than simply, oh, not all the conditions will apply?
Just to the pre-existing special permits, which are very few in the county.
Right. I guess I just, I'm a little uncomfortable with just saying these are the special pre-existing permits, but not all the conditions are going to apply. That just seems like a very broad statement, and I guess I'm wondering if what we're trying to do is say that that the Planning Commission has the authority and the ability to waive or modify. I guess I would rather see that wording. The wording troubles me just a little bit. I don't necessarily have as much concern about the particular special permit, but the text change just feels very broad to me. And I don't know if that's the same thing anyone else is. I mean, I see where we're going with it. I guess I just feel like saying these are the conditions, but not everything's going to hit that condition. That I don't feel like that. Maybe that's tight enough.
We do have other special permit provisions where you have that kind of flexibility.
So is it simply implied then, if we say not all the conditions will apply, that that Planning Commission has the final say? Is that?
Because you approve special permits subject to appeal to city council or county board.
My concern is not with the breadth of the language, but with its necessity.
With the,
Why is this language necessary? Can't we already waive conditions to pre-existing special permits?
not always, not unless within that particular set of special permit provisions for that particular kind of use, it says that you can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
One more question. Oh, Maya.
Could you please just go over again what the reasoning was for making stone milling an accessory use versus just alongside?
I think if you look back at the original language where it talks about the mining and processing of materials, it's always kind of been implied that those pieces go together, that's kind of a single piece. Not that it's mining and over here you're going to process, but it's mining and processing. So I think we're just making sure that that's clear, that this isn't a special permit that could be excavation, or it could just be a rock crusher. We want to make sure that if there is some kind of a stone milling operation involved, that it is associated with a mining operation, because you have that land use in place. You're pulling minerals out of the ground. That's an appropriate place to process and handle those minerals.
Are there stone milling permits out there that are not connected
We
to
have
an
a
excavation?
couple rock crusher permits in the industrial districts in Lincoln. There are also temporary rock crushers that are associated with construction or demolition projects. So for instance, if they're tearing up a large amount of concrete, they might set up temporarily on that site to crush and haul that out. In the ag district out in the county, there aren't any freestanding rock crusher kind of
And they
uses.
will be considered a pre-existing permit and
If they
allowed
had
to
been in
continue to
operation
operate?
since prior to 1979, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
I think we're, are we?
Are you
fine?
going to talk about the
Yeah.
particular? Okay. I'll hold the
particular
next
special
question for
permit,
that.
yes. Okay, many of you are probably familiar with the Schwartz Quarry facility. It's on South 54th Street and Whitstruck Road, which is about a mile and a half. Whitstruck is 2 miles south of Saltillo. This site has been in operation certainly since 1971, as possibly back into the 1930s. At one time, it was actually on both sides of 54th Street. So this area right here, which is in the Roca jurisdiction, was at one time part of the Schwartz Quarry, and it's now been changed into a residential use. So you can see the old quarry has become a pond, and there are homes built around it now. You can also see that there is a CUP existing right here, where there are several houses that have been built and a few vacant lots still in place. The quarry is broken up into 4 lots. One of the lots up in the north here has a stone cutting business on it. The quarrying activity is actually down here. Most of the limestone has already been gathered from this area of the special permit, and the active mining is down here. In this area, there is limestone block. There's a crushing operation right here for limestone as well as other materials, and a scale house up here that's in place. And it's a newer scale house, but that's the site of the original scale house. I've gone through the conditions of the special permit and kind of pointed out which, for this pre-existing special permit, which of these they are able to meet and which they are not. Most of the ones that are the ones that we're not recommending that they be made to meet are the ones that have to do with closure of the mine in a relatively short period of time. For instance, we have a condition that a bond be provided for reseeding and replacing topsoil and that sort of thing. This facility, although it's not completely clear exactly how long it would be operating, but the operator believes that it will probably be 25, 30, 35 years before this operation is mined out, and that he would close it down. We are making a condition that there be some kind of a site plan shown that this is actually, there is actually some potential in the future to have a residential use on this, probably a residential use. It doesn't seem that agricultural would be applicable to this. They do provide a site plan. You can see that the area of the special permit stops short of the ROCA jurisdiction here. The mining is going on in the ROCA's jurisdiction, and so this special permit is really tied to that area of land, because if there's no mining operation, there's no excavation special permit. So the activity in that area, it's important that that continue to be used for mining. And that is a note in their special permit that that area will be managed in a way that's complementary and tied to the rest of the special permit. Screening along this side is provided by fencing, that's safety fencing basically. There is some screening along here. You can see a little bit of evergreen that has been planted in here. So there's been some screening planted there. There's also some natural screening because of topography, but visual screening along 54th Street will be important to fill out. So make sure that that is built out to the extent of the special permit area. The county engineer has requested some information on the traffic in the area and how this will be affected, or how this will affect the roads that they have. That is a paved road that runs adjacent to the property there. So that will be provided. And we have some limitations on the noise in the area. On the operations in the area. The rock crusher is going to be only Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 regular business hours. And then excavation, I have a memorandum that I've given to you on this one on hours of operation. After a little further research, it was discovered that prior to 2009, when this Monday through Saturday requirement was put into that, that this mine was actually closed on Saturdays and open on Sundays, and so they do have a pre-existing condition of having a history of operating on Sundays. So we're just looking at the daylight hours for the excavating of the actual materials, and then there would be other uses. They do maintenance on the off hours, tire care and mechanical care on the vehicles. Let's see, there's another, in that memo that I passed out, there's another condition that they're going to be adding. This has to do with a neighborhood meeting that was held back in August, but also a letter that you were forwarded from one of the neighbors being concerned about explosive use. Apparently back some time ago when this was under separate management, the mining was actually done by using dynamite. This owner has no intention of doing that. Apparently it's very difficult to get dynamite permits for one thing, but they have no intention of using that, and are willing to add this letter or this note in here that says no explosives will be used in the mining operations, so that we don't have that noise disturbance. I think that's all that I have on that. Unless you have questions.
Kathy?
Sarah, I'm going to ask a couple questions I called you about earlier, just to make sure I understood and to share the information a little bit. Can you address, so looking specifically at page 50, at the groundwater report questions, do you know, I know one of my questions was if there were residential wells in the area and we were within 1,000 feet of any of those. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The Brush Creek addition, which is the one immediately east of here, was done with rural water. I don't have a lot of information on the Quarry Ledge development, which is on the west side. That's in ROCA's jurisdiction, so I'm not sure how that was developed, but I would assume that they also have rural water. The majority of the properties in this region all have rural water. So I don't think that there's any particular concern about individual wells. And you also asked about the surface water quality and the runoff and that sort of thing. This is, maybe I should put it back up here. As I showed you, the excavation activity is really down in this area. Drainage is towards the north. There's another pond that sits, there's one right about here that sits in here and has been it looks to be in place for quite some time. There's vegetation growing around it. It seems to be a relatively healthy pond, and then it drains on and eventually gets into this tributary that goes to Salt Creek. Surface drainage changed because this is a quarry and it's going down, the things are being removed from there. Most likely that would increase the drainage into this area, but it's unlikely that this would increase drainage out onto adjacent properties. We do also have watershed management requirements for drainage onto adjacent properties that would have to be followed. This special permit doesn't in any way entitle them to break any of the other, requirements for clean water and erosion and sediment control. So they'll still be following those rules. And the floodplain development rules as well.
And then just a follow-up that we talked about as well, on page 52, when we talk about normally with this type of special permit, they're getting an annual inspection, and you said that is not necessary with this, and it differs from others. Could you just explain why it differs?
Sure. The soil mining permits that these conditions were written for, or I shouldn't say written for, that was what was in mind when these conditions were written. We're talking about operations where you have open, erodible ground during that soil mining operation. The annual inspections are meant to make certain that the excavation is being done in the way that it was planned, that the grade is being returned as soon as they're done excavating, that the sediment and erosion control materials are in place, that sort of thing. Annual inspections on this, well, I suppose you could require annual inspections, but this isn't an operation that is working towards a near future closure. So we're not looking at returning grades to a grade map that says, okay, this is how we're going to farm this property when we get done. We're looking at more of a long-term, and not really even, because you don't know where those veins of rock are exactly, not really even completely certain how that final grade will lie. It's just a different kind of operation from what you would see with a soil mining operation.
And so they are changing the topography. Let's say just accidentally the runoff switches and it's now going to somebody else's land. We're not doing an annual inspection. And so I was asking you, how does that get detected, or what happens in that case?
Just like a lot of our other special permits in the county, if there were any issues with runoff, with noise, with light, with whatever it is, it would be handled on a complaint type basis. Our building and safety department kind of gathers those complaints and then makes sure that the other departments that are in charge of that particular thing. In this surface water issue, it would most likely, since this is in our new growth area, it would most likely go to the watershed management group for addressing that problem.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Sarah? All right, we'll hear testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. Danae Kalkowski. I'm appearing today on behalf of Gaina Trucking and Excavating, Inc. I'm also here today, Mike Eckert with Civil Design, and we have a representative from Gaina Trucking and Excavating, Brandon Gunther, and then Ed Ring with Ring Holding is also here today. Everybody will be available for questions when we're done if you have any. Gaina is a local excavation company, actually was started in Lancaster County back in 1994 by Craig and Lori Gaina, and has grown to over 160 employees. So they're a sort of a homegrown success story. Gaina purchased the Swark Quarry, I think part of it back in 2008 and the other part of it in 2012. And prior to that, they did a lot of business with the quarry, both purchasing material there and jointly working with them on projects. So this was a site they were intimately familiar with before they purchased it. Gaina owns the approximately the south 86 acres, and then Ring Holding has the north 28 acres, I think that Sarah pointed out in her presentation. As she mentioned, both of these properties are already covered by a pre-existing special permit since the activities, the quarrying, the stone milling activities were already occurring on here before the zoning code was even put in place or a special permit was even required. Again, is in requesting an amendment to the special permit, the pre-existing special permit, and we have a list of reasons why. There are multiple things we're trying to accomplish with this amendment. Number one, we're adding a 5,000 square foot office building that would be potential for future use as part of the excavation business. That's really just leaves them some opportunity for expansion in the future. Right now, they don't house their excavation operation here, but they want to have the ability to do that. And because we're asking for that amendment and it's a change or somewhat expanding the use on that site, we're trying to also comply with as many of those conditions that are in the current special permit section as possible. So part of the other reason for coming through this process is to, number one, to further clarify the existing and the permitted uses on the site, and then to add some restrictions and additional information to the site plan that brings this site more into tune or into compliance with the current special permit conditions. For example, we're limiting the location of stone milling on the site. Under the pre-existing special permit, there was no limitations on where we could put the rock crusher. So we're limiting the location for that. We're limiting the hours of operation that the stone crusher will operate, and the hours of operation for actual excavation occurring on the site. We're adding the screening along South 54th Street. We're agreeing to keep the stone crusher and all of the buildings out of the 100-yard rear yard setback. So putting in place a lot of things, I think, that give the neighbors some additional protections and help more specifically, delineate things that are happening on the site. Craig Gaina and Steve Hendrickson from the Planning Department and other representatives met with the neighbors back on August 5th, prior to even making any submittal. Wanted to visit with those neighbors about Craig's plans or Gaina's plans for the property, get some feedback from them before we even moved forward with an application. We had over 11 properties represented at the meeting, which included some people from the east, a neighbor from the south, some from the west, and even we had a really good representation basically all around the site. It really was a very positive meeting. I think the majority felt that Gaina had been a good neighbor and had done a lot of cleanup on the site since they had come into ownership of it. I think the neighbors acknowledged that at the time their homes were built, that quarry was already in existence and operating there, so it's no surprise to these neighbors that these kinds of activities are going on there. I think the largest concern that was expressed at the meeting that was pertinent to the special permit was the hours of operation for the stone crusher. And so Craig had agreed, Gaina at that meeting, that he would be willing to limit those hours of operation, and so that's coming forward in one of the conditions on the site plan. We support the amendments to the city and county excavation special permit ordinances. I think the revisions provide better clarification with the addition of that definition for stone milling and make the provisions more relevant to dealing with a pre-existing special permit. And that language is important to us because as we come forward and want to do something that expands our site a bit, it pops us then into that special permit list of conditions. And there's no way we can meet some of them with the type of use that we have. So really all of that language that there was a lot of discussion about just really recognizes the actuality of what's happening. You're going to have a pre-existing site that may need an amendment, so you're coming in under that special permit condition now, and there's no way to meet all of those conditions. And we want that flexibility to be able to work through that with planning department and with you without having to come back to council, which is what would otherwise be required under that section. Gaina is accepting all of the staff conditions with the amendments that Sarah has talked about. The special permit application and the zoning text amendments are the result of multiple meetings and lots of collaboration with both city and county staff. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to come in and work with them. We appreciate Steve coming out and meeting with the neighbors so that we could provide good information to those neighbors and get some good feedback before we ever even made the application and started moving forward. I think this amendment provides some potential opportunity for growth for a nice local company, but it also puts in place some protections for the neighbors. So I think it's a win-win for both sides. I'd be happy to answer any question. As I said, Mike's available, and so are representatives of the property owners.
Any questions?
I have one quick one. One thing that it says, excavation operation will be limited to daylight hours, Monday through Saturday. Other accessory and maintenance operations may continue outside those hours. I was curious about like loud trucks, or if there were other concerns of other things that were noisy, or if pretty much you felt like the excavation and the no dynamite and the stone crusher covered what
Crusher
people were
was the
worried
main
about.
thing. The dynamite. There were two other things. They do some truck maintenance on there right now. So there is a little bit of noise in the evening if they're doing tire work with an air jack or some of that. I think the neighbors recognize that's just a part of having a business that's operating. You're not going to do all that maintenance during the day. You're going to do it when the trucks are back in and you have the opportunity to do it. There was an administrative amendment to the special permit for a maintenance building, so they're going to be able to enclose some of that, so that may be able to help a little bit with the noise. That may just be something that is just part of the operation that we can't do anything about. The other noise thing that got brought up at the neighborhood meeting was the trucks braking as they're coming down 54th Street. And Gaina Trucking has had, what do they call those, Jake brakes? Air brakes. Gaina Trucking can control its trucks and has, but we can't control them all. And so even the neighbors acknowledged after they made the complaint to Gaina and they talked to their truck drivers that was reduced, but there is a little bit of noise from just the truck usage on the road. But
most of that is during daylight,
yeah,
I would
and most
assume,
of that
right?
obviously would be during the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, do we have other testimony in support of the application? Do we have testimony in opposition to the application? All right, any more questions for staff?
On the memo, first of all, I missed that I already have a 2.12, so that second one there should be numbered 2.13. And then in my presentation, I mentioned a conversation that we've had with the applicant about a eventual closing use. You know, what would this property be used for? How would it be laid out? And we had discussed that, and the applicant had agreed to provide some kind of a site plan. Unfortunately, I did not put it into my staff report, so I need to add a 2.14. And that would be to provide a site plan showing a future residential layout after the excavation operation is complete to the satisfaction of the planning director. And this would just be a basic layout, not to the depth that a preliminary plat, for instance, with the road grades and all of that. Just something that will demonstrate that there is a future use for this property. Do we have any questions?
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead and entertain a motion.
I need to call them separately, so.
All right.
Maybe. Calling for action, text amendment number 14012, which is the county zoning resolution for excavation and stone milling special permits to allow stone milling as an accessory use to an excavation operation, to eliminate stone milling as a separate permitted use, and to clarify that pre-existing excavation operations may not meet all conditions. Staff is recommending approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion? Well, I believe the text amendment is appropriate after much questioning on it, and so I am going to support the text amendments. Call the vote, please.
Sunderman,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Beecham,
Yes.
Cornelius,
Yes.
Poe,
Yes.
Lust.
Yes.
Motion for approval carries 6-0. This is a recommendation to the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners. Calling for action, text amendment number 14013, amending section 2763160 of the Lincoln Municipal Code. It is basically the same language as the county text amendment, and staff is recommending approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, call the vote.
Sunderman,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Beecham,
Yes.
Cornelius,
Yes.
Poe,
Yes.
Lutz.
Yes.
That motion also carries 6-0, and this is a recommendation to the City Council. Calling for action, pre-existing special permit 40A, amending the special permit for excavation and stone milling to show existing and future buildings and to allow an additional access to South 54th Street, generally located at South 54th and Whitstruck Road. I would note the staff recommendation is conditional approval as amended today.
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion.
It seems as though what we have here is a balancing act between providing an opportunity for a local business to grow and protecting the neighbors. As has been observed, the neighbors didn't come to the area until after the quarry already existed, so they're familiar with the operation. In spite of that, it sounds like many of their concerns were addressed by the text amendment changes and those compromises that the applicant was willing to agree to. So I support this change to the special permit.
I agree. I'm going to support the change. It's always nice to see the parties all working together and coming to an agreement so that we can move forward with a good business for Lancaster County. Call the vote.
Sunderman,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Beecham,
Yes.
Cornelius,
Yes.
Poe,
Yes.
Lutz.
Yes.
Okay, motion for conditional approval as amended carries 6-0, and this is final action unless appealed to the City Council.
All right. At this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item that was not on the agenda may do so. Seeing no one coming forward, we are adjourned.